What if the person destined to change your life forever were the one your whole world said you should avoid? Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. Louis, now 34, was holding the steaming coffee mug as he walked through the large glass wall meeting room, impeccable leather shoes echoing on the marble floor. The strong aroma invigorated him, but what really made him smile was the buzz of employees across the wall. He could hear soft laughs and the sound of frantic keyboards, signs that space was not just a company, but a second home for many. Louis knew the name of each of them, from managers to interns. A surprise meeting with the team was scheduled for that morning, something he often did to understand what really happened beyond the numbers in the reports. This made him feel that he was at least there in control of something genuine. Sitting at the head of the table, he reviewed a presentation sketch, but his mind wandered. In the midst of forced calm, he echoes his father's sharp voice in the last call. Your results are good, but still years to be half of the man Harry is. You just don't have the firm pulse necessary to lead. It was always like this. And even now, with his grandfather's legacy shining through the company's prosperity, he was never enough. Louis adjusted the tie with a sigh, hiding the melancholy that insisted on weighing on his shoulders. Good morning, Mr. Montclair. The animated voice of his assistant, April, brought him back to reality. He smiled with usual kindness, thanking him before starting the meeting. The warm smile hid the loneliness, a shield he wore so well that almost no one noticed. Across the city, Beatrice, 30 years, hastily set a pile of documents on the small office table. The sun that crossed the windows illuminated the worn chairs, the faded painting and the tight space she lovingly called her trench. She was late to serve a woman who needed help dealing with a dump. It was always like this, people who arrived at their hopeless office and went out with something to believe. Beatrice couldn't imagine himself doing anything else. Sorry for the delay, Dona Martha, she said with a welcoming smile as she opened the door. The client, a lady with a weather-marked, returned her smile with bright eyes. While listening to the woman's story, Beatrice scribbled notes on a notebook with a worn cover, her quick hands reflecting the urgency of her work. The fees would be low, as always, but it didn't matter. When she delivered results to her customers, she felt she was doing something significant. Even so, sometimes, when the days were longer and the processes seemed endless, she felt her tiredness. Scratching her determination, after saying goodbye to the client, Beatrice looked at the clock and realized she had barely lunch. He took a sandwich from the local bakery and sat on a nearby park bench. The sound of the kids playing, the aroma of the trees and the soft breeze always helped her to recharge her energies. She bit the sandwich while mentally reviewed pending cases. Somewhere inside her there was still doubt. Would you be sacrificing too much? Louis, from the top of his corporate coverage, and Beatrice, from the bustling heart of the neighborhood, followed their routines. He carried the weight of a name and expectations that suffocated him, she, the weight of alien dreams that struggled to make reality. Their worlds had not yet collided, but it was as if fate was adjusting the pieces to the inevitable encounter. Louis leaned his fingers on the cold glass of the window of his topping, watching New York's horizon illuminated with the lights of the dusk. The city seemed to throb in life, but to him that show was just another contrast to the emptiness he felt. It was the beginning of autumn, and the wind carried a melancholy that it seemed to share. That's when your phone rang, breaking the silence. April, his assistant, sounded apprehensive on the other end of the line. Mr. Montclair, sorry to call this time, but I received an urgent notification. There is a problem with the store acquisition contract in Parkside. It seems that there was a legal error, and they are contesting the agreement. Louis frowned. Parkside was the key piece of his new strategy to expand the company's reach. He could not allow something to go wrong. Understood, April. I want a lawyer to take care of it immediately, he responded firmly, but inside he felt the tension spread. It was one more thing to deal with, and he knew that any mistake would be another ammunition for Harry and his family. The next morning Louis drove personally to the office recommended by one of his contacts. He was selective and made a point of understanding who was taking care of his interests. When he parked in front of the small red brick building where Beatrice worked, he was surprised. The place was modest, almost invisible among the neighborhood stores and cafes. Is it here? He murmured to himself, adjusting the wristwatch before entering. Beatrice was on the phone, the voice firm but serene. I understand, Dona Martha. I'll take care of it personally. Don't worry. When he hung up, he heard the sound of the door opening and raised his eyes. Louis Montclair's view entering the office made his heart stop for a moment. He was tall, with striking features and an air of sophistication that seemed displaced in that simple environment. Louis, on the other hand, was also intrigued to see Beatrice. She was not what he expected from a lawyer. With unpretentious hair and warm eyes, she exuded an energy that immediately disarmed him. When she smiled to greet him, he felt an unexpected warmth, something he rarely experienced. Mr. Montclair, right? I'm Beatrice Sullivan, she said, extending her hand. His voice was soft, but there was a firmness that he immediately respected. Louis squeezed her hand, feeling the strength behind the gesture, something that contrasted with her apparent delicacy. While Beatrice drove him to a chair and began to ask about the case, Louis could not avoid noting the details of the environment. A plant in the window, a group portrait where Beatrice seemed to be surrounded by smiling people, and a pile of papers that clearly showed that this was an office that breathed work. He was curious about who was that woman who seemed so different from anyone he knew. Beatrice, in turn, observed Louis as he explained the problem. Her voice was controlled, but there was a subtle vulnerability in her eyes that intrigued her. He was not just the confident CEO she expected. There was something more, a complexity she couldn't decipher. Do you have any documentation that I can review? She asked, keeping the professional tone. Louis handed over the papers, and as she read them, he took her, studying her gestures, how lightly bit her lip as she concentrated, the way she organized the documents accurately. He was surprised to realize he was distracted. It seems that there was a dubious interpretation in one of the clauses, said Beatrice, interrupting Louis's thoughts. Nothing we can't solve, but I will need some more details to reinforce our argument. I trust you can solve it, he answered, and his voice sounded smoother than he intended. For a moment, her looks crossed, and Beatrice felt a strange warmth up her face. She deflected quickly, pretending to focus on the notes. When Louis left the office, he felt different. It wasn't just the relief of knowing that the problem was in good hands. There was something in the presence of Beatrice who was with him. An echo of something he could not name. Beatrice also got thoughtful after Louis's departure. There was a silent force in him that intrigued her, but also a sadness she felt almost palpably. Don't be distracted, Bea murmured to herself, trying to focus on work, but fate had other plans. Louis and Beatrice didn't know, but that meeting was just the first of many. Something had been planted at that moment, a connection that, though fragile, was beginning to grow. Louis entered Beatrice's office for the second time in less than a week, feeling the slight scent of coffee that always seemed to turn in the air there. He was not sure what made him notice something so trivial, but the small, modest, and cozy space was beginning to record in his memory in a way he could not avoid. Beatrice was leaning over the table, the eyebrows frowned in concentration while noting a block. She didn't even hear him enter. Louis stood for a moment, watching her. Her hair was stuck in a practical way, but some strands escaped, falling gently around the face. She seemed so absent in work that he hesitated to interrupt her. For the first time, he realized that he liked that kind of dedication. It was not like the incessant efforts of his executives trying to impress him, but something genuine, as if each client were the most important person in the world. Should I beat? He asked, finally breaking the silence. Beatrice looked up, and a slight smile played on her lips before she straightened in her chair. Mr. Montclair. Sorry, I was just reviewing some clauses of the contract. You can enter. Louis approached, sitting in front of her, trying to seem relaxed. But there was something in the way Beatrice looked at him, so straightforward and without pretensions, that it made him feel like being examined at a level that no one else reached. He took the jacket and carefully put it on the back of the chair, an automatic gesture that Beatrice observed without commenting, but revealed how accustomed to a life of formality. Any progress in the case? He asked, trying to sound casual. Beatrice placed the papers on the table and adjusted her glasses, the particular look. Yes, and I have good news. The dubious interpretation that the other party is using against your business has a weakness. We can build our argument around it and ensure that the acquisition is validated. It will require a solid strategy, but I am confident of that we can win. Louis caught himself smiling slightly. Confident is a word I like to hear. Beatrice arched an eyebrow, leaning forward. Trust is essential in this type of work. But I need to know, Mr. Montclair, how far are you willing to go to solve this? Some measures can be more combative, and this can mean friction with the other part. There was a moment of silence. Louis was not used to anyone questioning him so directly. He has always been the CEO, the figure of authority that dictated the rules. But there he was, Beatrice, challenging him without fear, and it moved him. I'm prepared, he said finally. But I confess that I'm curious about your approach. You seem to deal with these cases as if you are protecting something personal. Beatrice laughed softly, but there was a shadow of seriousness in her eyes. That's how I see each client, Mr. Montclair. Whether it's a large company or a single mother being dumped, the work is always personal. I fight like my own cause. Louis felt a tightness in his chest. There was a passion in her words that made him feel small, as if the fortune and the power he accumulated did not mean as much as the impact she seemed to have on the world around her. He admired her for it, but he also felt uncomfortable, as if she was illuminating a void inside him that he would rather ignore. I must say, you are different, he commented, choosing the words carefully. Most of the lawyers I worked with deal with cases like numbers in a spreadsheet. Beatrice crossed her arms, leaning back into the chair. Well, maybe I should treat him as a number then, she said with a tip of irony, but soon softened her tone. Play. But you know, Mr. Montclair, maybe that's exactly what you need, someone you see beyond the numbers, the conversation continued. But something had changed. Louis began to make room in his mind to think about Beatrice not only as a lawyer, but as a person who intrigued him. The warm tone of her made him want to talk more, share more, something he did not often do. Beatrice, in turn, fought a confusing feeling. There was something in Louis that pulled her closer, even if she tried to maintain the relationship strictly professional. He seemed to carry a weight she recognized, something she saw in many of her customers, but was disguised as success and power. When Louis left the office that afternoon, he felt that the interactions with Beatrice were more than he expected. He didn't know if this was good or bad, but one thing was certain, she made him think. Beatrice closed the door after he left, but remained standing there for a moment, looking at nothing. Louis's presence left a trail, and she hated admitting to herself that she was curious to learn more about the man who seemed to be a riddle in an expensive suit. Louis parked his luxury car in front of Beatrice's modest building, but this time, he didn't immediately come in. He stayed there for a few minutes, watching the movement on the street. Children ran with backpacks on their backs, and a lady passed a shopping cart full of fresh vegetables. It was a stark contrast to the glass skyscrapers and concrete that dominated their daily world. He felt a twinge of curiosity about what it would be like to live in such a living place, so full of humanity. He finally got out of the car and got into the building, where he found Beatrice talking to a young mother who held a baby on her lap. Beatrice heard carefully as the woman explained, in a distressed tone, that she had received an unfair letter of eviction. Don't worry, let's fight it, said Beatrice, the voice firm, but full of kindness. When the woman thanked, tears in her eyes, Louis realized something that left him disconcerted. Beatrice didn't do what she did out of obligation or ambition, but because she really cared. It was a force other than that he knew. After the woman left, Beatrice looked at Louis with a casual smile. Sorry for that. Can I help you now? Will she get what she needs? He asked, before he even mentioned the reason for his visit. If I can help, yes, said Beatrice, while collecting the rolls the client had left. She stared at him for a moment, surprised by the genuine interest he seemed to show. Louis, the CEO, used to moving corporate mountains, seemed genuinely touched by the fight of a young mother. I admire that, he said after a break, with a tone that surprised him. You give these people something I never thought of offering. Hope. Beatrice blinked, not knowing how to respond immediately. I was not used to receiving compliments like this, much less from someone like him. I just do what I can. But, thank you. That afternoon, after discussing the next steps of Louis's case, Beatrice suggested that he accompany her to a court hearing. It will be fast, she said, with a challenged smile. If you want to understand how I work, you can start by seeing how we deal with a real situation. He hesitated. It was something totally out of his comfort zone, but the idea of seeing Beatrice in action intrigued him. Okay, he said, adjusting the tie. In court, Louis was impressed. Beatrice spoke with a calm but passionate authority. She argued clearly, dismantling the allegations of the other party with impeccable logic. Louis could feel respect in the judge's eyes and even the opposing lawyers. When the case was closed, with a favorable result for Beatrice's client, she left the court with a victory smile that seemed to illuminate the environment. You have a talent, Louis said as they walked out. I have dedication, said Beatrice, with humility. Talent, maybe, but I believe more in hard work. Louis was silent for a moment, reflecting on his words. He realized that Beatrice not only challenged his ideas about what meant being successful, but also about what he meant being happy. The following days, Louis began to find excuses to extend his meetings with Beatrice. He asked questions about her other cases, finding that she had helped from small shopkeepers to vulnerable people. Beatrice, in turn, began to see a side of Louis that she did not expect, a man who, although surrounded by wealth and power, seemed deeply lost. One afternoon, while discussing the contract in a coffee near Beatrice's office, he surprised her to say, "You make me question things I never thought of questioning. As if what I thought was important may not be everything." Beatrice was surprised, but saw something in his eyes that looked sincere. "Maybe you just need to look at things from another angle," she said calmly. Meanwhile, the corporate world of Louis was far from being at peace. His cousin Harry was determined to destabilize him, spreading rumors about Louis's controversial decisions to weaken his position. Louis knew he was being tested not only as a leader, but as a person. The difference now was that he was beginning To understand that it was not all about impressing his family, the friendship between him and Beatrice continued to grow. There was something comforting in the way she talked to him, without flattery, without pretense. One night, as they walked down the street after a long meeting, he looked at her and said, "You're different from anyone I've ever met." Beatrice laughed softly. "And is that good or bad?" "It's good," he said without hesitation. "Very good." While the two followed their separated paths that night, Louis realized that there was something in Beatrice's smile that stood with him long after she left. And Beatrice, in turn, began to realize that perhaps Louis was more than the rich CEO she imagined. Louis was sitting at the head of the long Montclair mansion dining table, surrounded by members of his family, each more distant and indifferent than the other. The atmosphere, as always, was cold, despite the opulence that adorned the environment. A gigantic chandelier hung on the table, spreading a golden light on the fine porcelain dishes and silver cutlery. But the brightness did not reach the hearts present there. Harry, sitting on the left of Louis, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, cousin, I heard that you are spending a lot of time out of the office lately. It seems that you are working closely with a lawyer? Is that true?" Louis felt the blood cool. It was not uncommon for Harry to try to get information out to use it against him, but the malicious tone made it clear that he knew more than he should. "Beatrice is a highly competent professional who is taking care of an important case for the company." Louis answered calmly, but his tensioned jaw was his discomfort. His mother, sitting on the other end of the table, dropped the cutlery with an annoying noise. "A lawyer? I hope at least it is a respectable firm. You know, Louis, the choices of those you associate directly reflect on our image. We can't allow rumors to put our reputation at risk." "It's not a matter of reputation," Louis said, now firmly. "She is excellent in what she does, and that's what matters." Harry laughed softly, a sharp sound, loaded with derision. "Surely it must be excellent, considering how committed you seem to spend time with her. But tell me, cousin, what would she have in common with someone like you?" "Say the least." Louis felt anger growing inside, but controlled her, taking a deep breath before answering. "What matters is that she is honest, dedicated and talented. These are the qualities I look for, not her last name or her bank account." The room was silent. His mother raised his eyebrows, shocked by the boldness of the answer. Harry, on the other hand, seemed pleased, as if he had gotten what he wanted. "Very well, then," said his mother finally, the icy voice. "Just remember that everything you do reflects on all of us. And frankly, Louis, you don't have the luxury of being reckless." Judgment. Louis could barely eat during the rest of the meal. When he left the mansion, the night air seemed colder than usual, but perhaps it was only the weight of his family's words hanging over him. That same night, Beatrice was at home, sitting on the small couch of her apartment, reviewing documents while the radio played softly in the background. When the phone rang, she answered with a smile, already recognizing the number of Louis. "Good night," she said, closing the paste in her hands. "Good night, Beatrice," he replied, but there was a tiredness in her voice she immediately noticed. "Are you well?" she asked, feeling a twinge of worry. Louis hesitated for a moment before answering. "I had a family dinner. It was complicated." Beatrice smiled slightly. "Family is always complicated." They knew you," he said finally. "And, as expected, they didn't react well." Beatrice's smile disappeared. She felt her chest squeeze, but tried to keep her voice quiet. "I figured something like this could happen. It shouldn't be easy for them to understand why you're dealing with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Louis repeated, his voice suddenly firmer. "Someone who has more integrity in a day than many of them will have in a lifetime? They don't understand you, Beatrice, but it doesn't matter to me. I see who you are." Beatrice was silent, his words hit her. As much as she appreciated Louis's defense, the weight of the situation was hard to ignore. She didn't want to be the cause of most tension in her life. "Louis," she finally said, her voice low. "Maybe it's better if we keep it strictly professional. I don't want my presence to cause you problems." Louis closed his eyes, his heart tight with the idea of losing the connection that was becoming the only genuine thing in his life. "You're not causing problems, Beatrice. In fact, you're the only thing you have kept me lately." Beatrice felt her eyes worse, but didn't let the emotion show in her voice. "This is kind, but I don't want to complicate your life. Please think about it." When the call ended, Louis felt a deep void. He knew that what he felt for Beatrice was more than professional admiration, but he also knew she was right to fear the consequences. Beatrice sat in silence, the phone still in hand. For the first time in a long time, she felt the doubt erode her confidence. She liked Louis more than she should, and that scared her. Louis was in his office, but could barely focus on the pile of documents scattered in front of him. The black and white numbers looked out of blur, mixing in an unrecognizable blur. He ran his hands over his face, exuding a long breath. It was as if the pressure was bending over him on all sides: the tension in the company, Harry's poisonous innuendo, and, above all, the growing distance between him and Beatrice. He has not seen her for days, since that connection in which she suggested that it might be better to move away. Since then, a bitter feeling has pursued him, as if a vital part of his life was slowly escaping through his fingers. The door opened, and April came in carrying a folder. "Mr. Montclair, here are the reports of the last budget meeting. I also received a call from the board requesting an extraordinary meeting." Lewis waved distractedly. "Thank you, April," but she hesitated, watching him with concern. "Sorry to ask, but is everything okay? You seem distant." Lewis looked up at her, trying to smile. "Just a little tiredness, that's all." But the truth was much more than tiredness. He felt as if he was losing a battle against invisible forces: family expectations, professional responsibilities, and now the fear that Beatrice was moving away from him. Meanwhile, Beatrice was in one of the local cafeteria she attended to escape the chaos of the office. The steam of her cappuccino was rising in lazy spirals, but she did not pay attention. Her thoughts were trapped in Lewis, in the hoarse tone of his voice when she said she was her only source of sanity. She had repeated those words in her mind countless times, trying not to be carried away by the emotion they aroused. But at the same time, insecurity constantly whispered in his ear. Lewis belonged to a world that she would never fully understand. A world where each step was judged and each action had public consequences. Beatrice looked at the table in front of him, where the papers of a new case were scattered. It was from a small family trying to avoid eviction. She should be focused on that, but her mind insisted on returning to Lewis. She remembered the expression on his face when he talked about his family: the tired look, the veiled pain behind his always composed posture. He made her feel something that she hadn't felt a long time ago, a deep desire to protect someone, even when she knew she might not. 2 days later, Lewis finally took courage to contact her. He knew he couldn't let things go like this, without answers. That night he appeared in her small office, bringing with him the accumulated tension of recent days. When Beatrice opened the door and saw him there, he felt his heart shoot. He looked more tired than usual, but his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her hesitate. "Lewis, what are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her tone calm, though inside she was shaking. "We need to talk," he said simply, the voice firm, but with a vulnerability trait. She let him in and led him to one of the meeting room chairs. Lewis looked around, absorbing every detail of the modest space that seemed so far from the corporate world in which he lived. "Beatrice," he began, leaning slightly forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I know you think you get away as the best for me. But you are wrong. You don't understand what it means to me, having someone who really sees me for what I am." Beatrice swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words like a wave that pulled her inside. "Lewis, I see you. I see the good man you are. But I also see the pressure you face. And the truth is that I don't want to be a weight for you to carry." "You are not a weight," he interrupted, the most intense tone. "You are the opposite of this. For the first time, I feel I can be myself. Not the CEO, not the heir, but just me." Beatrice looked away, trying to hide the tears that threatened to fall. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was still holding her. "And your family?" she finally asked. "You know they will never accept it, Lewis. They will never accept someone like me." Lewis was silent for a moment, but then he got up and walked to her, stopping so close that she could feel the warmth of her presence. "My family never really accepted me, Beatrice. No matter what I do, I'm never enough for them. But you, with you, I don't feel like I need to prove anything. You're enough. And for me, that just..." His words disarmed her. She felt the barrier that had erected starting, but there was still a part of her that resisted, that feared what could happen if she gave in. "Lewis," she started, but before she could continue, he interrupted her. "Please just think about it. Think of us. Don't let the fear decide for you." He left before she could answer, leaving Beatrice alone in the room with a heavy heart and mind on whirlwind. Lewis was standing in the Montclair mansion living room, the opulent and cold environment perfectly reflecting what he felt. The walls were decorated with works of art that his mother collected with obsession, but which he had never been given to admire. In fact, that space was never a home to him, just a stage where the family staged his superiority show. This time he was there for his own choice, not summoned for a forced dinner or a protocol meeting. He had something to say, and for the first time in a long time, he decided that he would not be silenced. She felt the tears go up even before she realized she was crying. "Lewis, you didn't need to do that." "Yes, I needed," he answered, taking a step ahead. "Because you need to know that for the first time in my life, I chose something to me. I chose you." She looked at him, feeling the barrier she had built around herself finally crumpled. For the first time, she realized that the love that Lewis made her feel was reciprocal, genuine and strong enough to face anything. "I believe you," she said finally. And at that moment Lewis felt the weight of all doubts disappear. The rain fell constantly, painting the windows of Beatrice's apartment with water fillets that slid like silent tears. She was sitting on the small couch, her legs crossed and a blanket covering her legs. A tea rested on the coffee table, but his mind was far away. Louis was by her side, the jacket hanging on the back of a chair, the loose tie around her neck. He held a mug of hot tea, but didn't seem interested in drinking. The silence between them was comfortable but loaded. Since he appeared earlier that night, with his shoulders visibly tense and a look that seemed to look for comfort, they had not spoken much. Beatrice knew something was wrong, but patiently waited for him to be ready to share. Finally, he broke the silence. The meeting with the advice was a disaster, he said, the low voice, almost hoarse. Beatrice turned to him, his eyes immediately full of worry. What happened? Louis ran a hand over his hair, messing them slightly, something he rarely did. Harry. He is using everything he can against me. Comments on my management, hints about my personal life. He stopped, taking a deep breath before continuing. He hinted that my relationship with you is distracting me and harming the company. Beatrice felt her heart tighten. Louis. I don't want to be the reason for you to lose what you built. Maybe. Before she could finish, Louis put the tea mug on the table harder than she wanted and turned to her. No. Don't say that, Beatrice. It's not you. That's about them. They can't accept that I don't play for their rules. Harry is trying to manipulate the advice because he always wanted my place, but that has nothing to seeing you. I won't allow them to use you as an excuse. Beatrice looked at him, seeing the pain and determination mixed in his eyes. Even so, the doubt hung over her like a heavy cloud. I worry. I know how this world works, Louis. I know how much appearances matter to them. And I doubt. Louis held her hands, interrupting her. Beatrice, I never cared about the appearances. If I care about them it means giving you up, then it's not worth it. She felt the tears sprout, but didn't drop them. Instead, he squeezed his hands, as if that gesture could convey everything she couldn't put into words. The next morning Louis was back in his reality, the glass and marble office that always made him feel simultaneously at the top of the world and prisoner of his own life. He entered the meeting room where the advice was waiting for him, including Harry, who seemed more confident than ever. Montclair, started Harry, with the tone of false cordiality that made the blood of Louis boil. We are all concerned about the company's future. Your leadership has been recently questioned, especially with rumors circulating about your personal life. Louis remained calm, but inside she felt her anger burning. My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to lead this company, he said, his voice. The results speak for themselves. Since I took over, we have grown consistently. My focus remains the prosperity of this organization. Harry gave a wry smile. And yet, public perception also matters. Investors are always attentive, and if there is any questions about the stability of leadership. Louis interrupted, leaning over the table. The stability of leadership comes from the results, Harry, not rumors. His parents were sitting on the large dark leather couch with Harry standing next door, casually supported by one of the armchairs as if anticipating the outcome of the conversation. Everyone's gaze was inquisitive, but Louis didn't go back. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words he was about to say. I need to make something clear, he began, with a firmness that surprised himself. I won't allow you to interfere with my personal life. I've spent too much time trying to be what you wanted. It ends here. The reaction was instantaneous. Her mother widened her eyes, indignantly, as her father loosened a dry, full of contempt. Is this about that lawyer? He fired. Louis, be reasonable. People like her don't belong to our world. Do you think you can risk everything we build for someone who doesn't understand what it means to be one of us? You say it as if I were part of it, Louis replied, your voice laden with repressed pain. But the truth is that I have never been, isn't it? Nothing I do is enough for you. Neither the success of the company, nor the achievements I have achieved. By my own merit. There is always something that is missing, isn't it? Remember that I am inappropriate. His mother tried to interrupt him, but Louis lifted his hand, asking for silence. He had not ended. Beatrice is the only person who made me feel that being myself is enough. She doesn't want anything from me but who I am. And I won't give up it to try to please people who have never really cared about me. Harry shook his head with a cynical smile. And what happens when she realizes that she will never fit here, cousin? When she realizes that your world will consume it? Are you going to choose her or the company? Why, believe me, you can't have both. Louis turned to Harry, his eyes burning with a determination he had never shown before. You're wrong, Harry. What you never understood is that the company is not my life. And if I have to choose, there is no doubt that I will choose what really matters. Meanwhile, Beatrice was in her office, trying to focus on work, but failing miserably. The memory of the last conversation with Louis still pursued her, every word of him echoing in her mind. She knew he was fighting more than just the resistance of his family. There were years of suffocating expectations and frustrations he carried, and she feared being another burden to him. When the phone rang, she answered immediately, waiting for a customer. But when he heard April's voice, Lewis's assistant, his heart shot. Mississippi. Sullivan, I'm sorry to bother, but I thought you would like to know. Lewis has just left a meeting with his family. And well, he made it clear to everyone who won't give up on you. Beatrice was silent for a moment, trying to sue what she had heard. He said that? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Said, confirmed April. And honestly, I never saw him so determined. I just thought you should know. After the call ended, Beatrice sat in her chair, feeling a mixture of emotions so intense that it was hard to organize them. Part of her was incredibly moved by Lewis's courage, but another part was terrified of the consequences of this. She thought of everything he had said, every time he had made her feel that it was more than enough, even when she doubted it. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, Lewis was also the strength she needed to believe in love again. Later, that night, Lewis appeared in Beatrice's apartment, his hands in his pockets and a look that mixed anxiety and determination. When she opened the door, he hesitated for a moment before saying, I said to them, my family. I said I won't give up on you. Beatrice stared at him, trying to find the right words, but before he could say anything, he continued, and I want you to know that I'm not expecting this to be easy. But nothing worthwhile is easy, right? You are important for me, Beatrice. If you want to talk about numbers, I'm more than willing. But if this is just another attempt to divert focus to your personal agenda, I suggest you find another audience. The room was silent. The advice looked at Harry, clearly divided between his rhetoric and the conviction of Lewis. Harry retreated, but Lewis knew this was only temporary. Meanwhile, Beatrice was in court, representing a young mother who was fighting for visitation rights. It was a case that consumed her emotionally, but also made her feel that she was doing something significant. However, during the breaks, she could not avoid thinking about Lewis, wondering how he was dealing with everything. That night, when Lewis appeared in her apartment again, she saw tiredness on her face, but also something new, a quiet determination, as if he had found a balance that before. How was it? She asked as he sat next to her on the couch. Exhausting, he admitted. But necessary. They know that I won't back down. And that includes not back on us. Beatrice felt the heat rise to her chest, but also a touch of insecurity. You're so sure of us, Lewis? And I'm still learning to believe I deserve it. Lewis turned to her, holding her face with her hands. You don't have to deserve anything, Beatrice. You're all I need. And then, at that moment, he kissed her. It was a kiss full of raw emotion, a mixture of all fears and hopes they both carried. It was a silent promise that, regardless of what came, they would face together. The day dawned with a pale sky and rain promises, a perfect contrast to the mood of Lewis. He was in the office alone, his eyes fixed in the city's view while reflecting on the last months. It was the day of the big council meeting, and it would all reach the peak at that time. Harry had been manipulating the circumstances for too long, and Lewis knew this would be his chance to turn the game. He took a deep breath, adjusted his tie and ran his hand over his jacket. The reflection on the glass showed someone who seemed confident, but inside he felt a latent nervousness. You got here, murmured to yourself. Now it's time to show who you really are. When he entered the meeting room, all board members were present, including Harry, who already took his place with a calculated smile. Lewis felt the weight of each look, but this time would not retreat. Before we start, I would like to say a few words, Lewis announced, his voice firm, but loaded with the contained emotion. He remained standing, staring at each person in the room. I know that in recent weeks there has been doubts about my leadership. Rumors have been scattered, questions raised. And I know that many of you may be wondering if I'm still the right man for this position. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. Harry stirred uncomfortably in the chair, but Lewis continued. What I want to make clear today is that I am not here to please or meet expectations that were never made for me. I am here because I believe in this company, in its mission and the people who work in it. Manipulations. A silence took over the room. Harry tried to interrupt. With all due respect, Lewis, integrity is not enough. When Lewis cut, his voice still calm, but with an authority that made his cousin freeze. If you have something to say, be based on facts, not on insinuations. The advice began to murmur. And Lewis took advantage of the moment. If there is someone here who thinks I am not up to this position, say now. But know that I will not give up with honesty and respect. And I will not sacrifice who I am or who I love for a title. The room was silent. Slowly, one of the oldest members of the council, a man Lewis always respected, said, Lewis, his leadership brought unquestionable results. I don't think we need further evidence. One by one, the members agreed, and Harry, seeing their plan collapsing, remained silent, their teeth closed in frustration. When the meeting ended, Louis left the room feeling a gigantic weight out of his shoulders. He knew he had won more than a power dispute. He had finally been free from the currents that his family always tried to put on him. That same night, Louis appeared in Beatrice's apartment, this time with a bouquet of flowers. When she opened the door, he smiled, feeling a tranquility that he hadn't experienced for a long time. "I needed to see you," he said, delivering the flowers. Beatrice laughed softly, taking the bouquet. "Are you well?" "I've never been better," he answered, entering and sitting on the family couch. While Beatrice arranged the flowers in a vase, Louis told her about the meeting, the tone of her voice alternating between relief and satisfaction. "I finally said everything I needed to say. For the first time, I feel like I'm really leading. And you know why?" Beatrice turned to him, curious. "Why?" "Because you taught me it's worth fighting for what is real. And that includes you." Beatrice felt her face warm, but didn't look away. "Louis, I did nothing but be myself." He smiled. "And that was enough to change everything." In the following days, Beatrice also began to make changes. Inspired by Louis's courage, she decided to better balance her work and personal life. She still loved her work, but realized she didn't need to carry the weight of the world on her own. He started delegating more and even agreed to take a weekend for herself, something that had not done for a long time. One afternoon, while in his office, he received an envelope. Inside was a letter written by hand and a signed contract. It was a gesture of thanks for one of his clients, accompanied by a check. Beatrice was thrilled, but what really touched her was realizing that even in her constant effort to help others, she was also starting to learn to help herself. A few weeks later, Louis and Beatrice were together at a charity event that he had organized on behalf of the company. It was the first time they had appeared together publicly. Beatrice was nervous, but Louis held her by the hand, intertwining her fingers in her in a way that said speechlessly, "We're in that together." People watched them, some curiously, some with genuine smiles. But none of this mattered to them. At that moment, Louis and Beatrice knew they had overcome everything: doubts, external pressures and internal insecurities. While the two danced under the soft lights of the hall, Louis whispered in Beatrice's ear, "I never thought something as simple as love could be as transformative." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I never thought it deserved something that good." The morning was radiant, the sky painted with such a vibrant blue that it seemed to have been carefully chosen for that occasion. Beatrice was setting the documents on the table on her small office, but this time she was not a customer who expected. Louis had promised to find her there, and she felt a mix of calm and expectation when thinking about him. The last few months had been a roller coaster of emotions, but now there was a balance she didn't know how to be possible. His heart, once so used to carrying the weight of insecurities and doubts, now throbbed with a serenity that seemed new, but at the same time so natural. As she adjusted the last papers, the doorbell sounded, and she knew exactly who it was. Opening the door, he saw Louis there, holding a bag of a local bakery. He was more casual than usual, no tie and with his shirt sleeves bent but still impeccably charming. "I brought coffee and some croissants," he said, lifting the bag with a smile. "I thought we could start the day together." Beatrice laughed softly, letting him get in. "You're starting to understand how I work, aren't you?" "Let's say I'm learning from the best," he replied, leaving the bag on the small coffee table as he took a light coat. They sat side by side, the sunlight crossing the curtains and illuminating the small details of the environment. As they ate, the conversation flowed with a naturalness that only comes from those who found comfort in each other. Louis told about how the company was finally stabilized, how employees seemed more confident, and how even the council had become more collaborative after recent events. "And Harry?" Beatrice asked with a curious look. Louis shrugged. "He's quiet. For now, at least. I think he realized he won't be able to destabilize me so easily." He paused, looking at her. "And this is thanks to you." Beatrice stopped cutting the croissant, raising her eyes to him. "Thanks to me?" "Louis, you faced everything." "I was just here." "Exactly," he replied, his voice soft, but full of emotion. "You were here. You gave me something no one else could give, a place to be myself. And that made all the difference." She felt the heat rise to her face, but smiled. "I think you're giving more credit than I deserve." "You deserve more than I can offer," he said, holding his hand. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to show you how much you mean to me." Beatrice was speechless for a moment, just looking at him. It was amazing how things had changed. Who would say that the man who had entered his office months ago, with a serious expression and an almost untouchable stance, would become the person she now loved with such intensity? "What about you?" Louis asked, breaking the silence. "How are you dealing with all this?" Beatrice gave a light laugh. "Well, the truth is that I'm still learning. It's not easy to balance everything, but I think I'm getting there." "You seem to be doing an amazing job," he said, the evident pride in his voice. "And if you need help, well, I'll be here." Always later, they walked through the park near Beatrice's office, a routine they had adopted in recent weeks. The leaves of the trees began to gain fall shades, and the air had a lightness that perfectly matched the moment. Louis held Beatrice's hand, his fingers intertwined with ease that spoke of a bond built with care and dedication. "You know," Beatrice started, looking at the children who ran around a source. "I never imagined I would find something like this. Something so simple, but so complete." Louis stopped, turning to her. "Neither me. But here we are." He pulled her gently to the closer, the sound of the laughter and the surrounding wind creating a perfect setting. "Beatrice, I think life always tries to tell us something, even when we are too busy to hear. And what she has told me is that no matter what happens, while you are by my side, everything will be okay." She felt her eyes worse, but this time she didn't try to hold her tears. "And I," she said, the embargoed voice, "I promise I'll be by your side. Always." They stayed there, hugged, while the surrounding world was still in motion. It was a simple moment, but for them it was everything. They did not need large gestures or extravagant promises. Just the certainty that together they could face anything. That night, while the city shone in the star of the stars, Beatrice sat on the couch with Louis, her bare feet resting on his. A stack of books was at the table next door, along with 2 glasses of wine. "Do you think one day it will seem common?" she asked, playing with the ring on her finger. Louis looked at her, smiling. "If this is common, then I will never want anything extraordinary." They laughed together, and while the comfortable silence wrapped them again, Louis took her hand and held her firmly, as a silent promise reaffirmed. They knew that life would not be perfect, but they also knew it didn't matter. Because now they had each other, and that was more than enough. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family. Who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.